Hello and welcome back. Today we are going to be starting our lecture series on World War I. Specifically, we're going to start to talk about the different causes of World War I. There's no one direct cause of World War I. There's multiple causes, and which one is the most important cause? Well, I'll leave that up to you. So, World War One is going to be, just a completely different type of war. We've talked about total war before in previous lectures, Civil War and such, but World War One is going to be that on just a much grander scale. It's going to be one of the most costly wars in history. It's going to completely change the political map of Europe. There are going to be countries that had never existed before that are going to be created. There's going to be countries and empires that have been around for years and years that are going to just disappear. It's going to completely change the map of Europe. It's going to challenge progressive values. The idea that science and technology are capable of solving all of our problems. It's this World War One is going to just put an end to that. Science and technology can fix some of our problems, but science and technology are really going to make World War One devastating. It's the science of social Darwinism and the idea that we should group people by their ethnic groups and then rank them, from inferior to superior, like that's going to allow people to justify what is essentially going to be mass murder. We're going to see genocide happening in southeastern Europe during World War One. It's going to lay the groundwork for future genocides in World War Two, and that's all because of the science of social Darwinism, which we reject today. But I think we're seeing kind of a resurgence of grouping people by race and creating racial hierarchies, even in 2020. We're also going to see the technology, that solves a lot of our problems and makes things cheaper and more efficient. Also, is going to have a dark side to it because when we apply that to weapons, we're going to start to have weapons that are way more deadly. That are going to, we're going to have rifles that are way more accurate, way more deadly. We're going to have, machine guns, and then even in World War One, we're going to start to see weapons of mass destruction like poison gas are going to be used. And so, war becomes much more deadly. And so, the progressive idea that science and technology will solve all our problems, people are going to kind of be, jaded on that concept. So, what are the causes? Well, one of the main causes of World War One is going to be a rise in nationalism. Now, nationalism can have multiple different meanings. It's ultimately that we're going to kind of operate off of two different meanings of nationalism. First is going to be loyalty to the state. And so it's this idea that I'm a lot of things, but I'm an American first, or I'm a German first, or I'm English first. That in small doses is actually probably a good thing, right? Because it gives you a sense of community and an ability to kind of sacrifice for the people around you. It gives you a set of guiding moral principles, and that can be good. And in small doses, we call it patriotism, and patriotism is good. But if left unchecked, it can start to turn into nationalism, and it's that extreme loyalty to the state, which, when fueled by social Darwinism and the idea that we're supposed to not view people as individuals, but as part of a collective group, that inevitably leads to hierarchies and the idea that one group is better than another group, which then allows for justification of oppression of different groups and eventually war and killing other groups. And so the idea of nationalism is patriotism, but on massive amounts of steroids, right? The other operational definition, the definition that we're going to use for nationalism, is the desire to unite everybody of one ethnic group under one single government. So And again, this has to do with social Darwinism. It's if we're going to group people by their ethnic group, right? Like all Germans together, all Brits together, even all whites together, all blacks together. Then the idea is that these groups, whichever group you're in, all of those groups believe that they're the best group. And so if there are Germans living in France, which there are, the idea is, well, we want to, since they're a part of us and we're superior, we should, as Germans, be united under one German government. Well, the French won't want to give up the territory that they have where German, historically German people are living, and it's going to essentially cause conflict. And people aren't going to care about that conflict because they believe that their ethnic group is superior. We see this in history over and over and over. When societies say it's okay to group people by their ethnicity, what ultimately ends up happening is violence. When we start to take people as individuals with different backgrounds and recognize that even though we can group people, but at the end of the day, people are individuals and individually respected. You're going to see less of this kind of conflict, and so social Darwinism encourages grouping people by their ethnic group and saying that grouping is the most important part about a person. And then that leads to essentially racial hierarchies, ethnic hierarchies, and then eventually will lead to this sense of nationalism where my group needs to unite and essentially take resources from your group, and so that's what nationalism ends up being, and we're going to see that. Happen pretty successfully in Germany and Italy. Germany and Italy are recently united countries. They're relatively modern countries. The Germans are going to come out of the Habsburg dynasty, and the Italians are going to come out of the old Roman dynasty, and they have just essentially consolidated. And Germany, in particular, it recognizes that there are still areas, particularly on the border with France, where there's a heavy German population that they want to unite under their government, and that will cause tension. So, two of the geographic areas that become kind of the focal point for uniting ethnic groups are going to be in Alsace and Lorraine. Alsace and Lorraine is an area on the border of France and Germany. And then the other area is going to be the Balkan Peninsula. The Balkan Peninsula is that area right around Greece in Europe. It's like southeastern Europe. And the Balkan Peninsula is historically it's being dominated. At the time it was dominated by the Ottoman Empire. When the Ottoman Empire pulled back, the Austrian-Hungarian Empire was trying to exert influence there, but the people are Serbian. And so the people of Serbia, they're Slavic, and the Slavic people in in that area really identify more with the Slavs in Russia than the Austrian-Hungarian people, and so the Balkan Peninsula, Serbia, kind of as their leader, is trying to create like a Slavic territory in the Balkan Peninsula, and then that's going to be challenged by the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. And so these two kind of ethnic enclaves are going to really become focal points over, and contentious areas in Europe. So the first area we're going to talk about is Alsace and Lorraine. It's that red area right there on the border between Germany and France. It's about a 5,000 square mile area. It does have resources. Because it is a relatively resource rich area, both France and Germany want it. And they both claim historic rights to that area. And the reality is it's gone back and forth between the French and the Germans all throughout history. In the 9th century, so in like the 800s, the French controlled it. But then the Holy Roman Empire took over that region, and when the Holy Roman Empire took over that region, the Germans controlled it. That's essentially German empire, and then it went back to France. And so currently it's under the control of France, but there's a very heavy German speaking population living in that area. And so there's tons of Germans there. And so Germany wants that land because there are German people there. Nationalism is driving this idea that it should be theirs because there's Germans there. The French feel the same way because there's French speaking people there too. So they believe they should have it. And both sides essentially feel that their ethnic group is superior. And so that's going to give Germany the justification to go after this area. Now, France is, a has been historically one of the dominant powers in Europe, and Germany's a relatively new nation. But Germany is on the up and up. They've embraced science and technology. They've industrialized incredibly quickly. They have organized their government in such a way as to create really strong German unity. They've done that essentially through what they've done is essentially they have forced military service. It's called conscription, and so pretty much all fighting age men in Germany have to join the military and get military training, which has really unified the German people, gives them that shared experience. But what it's also done, it's made every German citizen a soldier, a fighter, and so Germany, who is heavily industrialized, that didn't have a military to speak of before, has built up this gigantic military with tons of people because of conscription, but also because it's a relatively new military, it's modern. And the industrial capacity has allowed for the development of all kinds of new modern weapons, and because they've industrialized, they have all kinds of railroads, and they've actually built railroads into the Alsace-Lorraine area. So they're going to be able to. They're super organized, and they're going to be able to move troops very quickly on these railroads. And so France just isn't prepared for that. They don't have conscription. They have a big military, but it's old with kind of older weapons. And, they're fighting still using the old strategies because the German military is new. They're relatively innovative. And because Germany just embraces education, they're always going to have innovative strategies in the military, even through World War II. And so war will break out over this area, and Germany just puts a whooping on the French. I mean, whoops them, kind of shocks the world. Everybody kind of just expects France because they've been such a major power for so long to win this war. But Germany, really just crushes France. It's humiliating for France. Napoleon III, the leader of France, actually gets caught. And when he gets captured, the Germans essentially just force the French to cede that land, Alsace-Lorraine, to Germany. So the Germany takes Alsace-Lorraine, which is humiliating for the French, but they also force the French to pay 5 billion francs for the cost of the war, and so it just adds insult to injury. This is going to create a really strong resentment in France. The French are really going to hate the Germans, and so which will lead to wanting revenge, which will ultimately lead to World War I and then eventually even World War II. It is pretty clear that Germany's military is now the strongest in Europe, and Germany knows it, which isn't going to make them timid, right? They're going to become even more aggressive around the world. So that like I said, that area is both French and German. It's resource rich. It's got a lot of iron. Iron is through the Bessemer process. The impurities are taken out of it and it's turned into steel, which is absolutely necessary for industrialization. So if Germany's military is going to keep growing, it's got to have this iron. And if their industry is going to keep growing, it's got to have this iron. So it's not just about nationalism here. It's also about resources, which is essentially imperialism, which we'll talk about as another cause later. The next reason that we're going to talk about is, the next area that we're going to talk about when we're talking about nationalism is the Baltic Peninsula, Balkan Peninsula. So Balkan That's this area right here. The Balkan Peninsula used to be a part of the Ottoman Empire, which is right above me here. The Ottoman Empire. Ottoman Empire is referred to as the sick man of Europe. It used to be one of the most advanced societies on the planet. And so, a lot of times I think we think, as advanced societies, we think North America and Europe, but, that every society around the world at one point was on top. It's a cyclical thing. And every society on the planet, I would imagine, will be on top again at some point in history. The Ottoman Empire was on the top at one point. They had the Janissaries were one of the elite fighting forces of the world. The Ottoman Empire embraced, science and, a lot of scientific advancements that led the European Enlightenment came out of the Ottoman Empire and the Arab people there. And so they were on top for a very long time. They were able to conquer Constantinople, which they turned which was kind of like the European power in the East. They changed the name from Constantinople to Istanbul. You can see Istanbul, which is right there. One of the most beautiful cities in the world, by the way. If you ever have a chance to go and see the Blue Mosque and the Hagia Sophia. There's just words don't describe. But anyway, the Ottoman Empire is on the decline. They just haven't modernized. It happens to all societies eventually, and they're on the retreat. And so there have been essentially a series of Balkan wars, and that have led to the independence of the Balkan region. And so there's the Ottoman Empire's on the retreat. This is why they're called the sick man of Europe, because they're weak and retreating. Well, a series of different countries are going to pop up, Bulgaria, Albania, Bosnia, Serbia. For our purposes, we're really going to focus on Bosnia and Serbia. When that happens, these nations start fighting each other. The Serbians are growing in strength. They're kind of becoming the leader of this area. The ethnic group that is predominant in this area are the Slavs. The Slavs are related to Russia. I mean, the largest Slavic power in the world is hands down Russia, who's got just a gigantic population. They're beginning to industrialize at this point. They're behind Europe in that, but they have so many people that they're definitely a world power. And so Serbia is kind of growing in strength, which upsets their northern neighbor, Austria-Hungary. Austria-Hungary is, has very close ties to Germany. There's strong Germanic population in Austria-Hungary. So again, we see grouping by ethnicity here. As a matter of fact, probably the most famous German ever is Adolf Hitler. And he's actually not born in Germany. He's born in Austria, which used to be a part of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. And so, Austria-Hungary is kind of nervous about the growing power of Serbia in that region. And so, what they end up doing is essentially annexing the area of Bosnia. And so, when they annex Bosnia, they move into Bosnia. This is going to upset Serbia. It's going to upset Serbia a lot. They don't, they kind of envision themselves as being the leader of having a sphere of influence in that region. Serbia is no match for Austria-Hungary. And so what will happen is they're going to turn based on nationalism. What they're going to do is they're going to look around for help against the Austrian-Hungarians. Well, which ethnic group does Serbia belong to? Well, the Slavs. What's the strongest Slavic nation out there? Well, that's Russia. So Serbia will essentially turn to Russia and say, can you help? Because Russia is Slavic, they're going to feel the need. They feel like they're the big brother to the Slavic people. And because Russia always wants access to the Black Sea for warm water ports, the Balkan Peninsula is crucial to their economy, and having a friendly Balkan Peninsula is crucial to their economy. They're going to decide that they're going to help Serbia. And so at this point, Austria-Hungary is looking around and says, oh my gosh, Russia is helping Serbia now. And Russia is just much stronger than Austria-Hungary. So, based on nationalism and grouping by ethnic identity, who can Austria Hungary turn to? That's right, Germany. They'll turn to Germany. And so you can see how tensions in this region are going to start to create an alliance system, which is another cause of World War One, based on this grouping by ethnic identity. This is ultimately this region of the world. Most people around the world have no idea what the Balkan Peninsula is and couldn't find Serbia on a map, couldn't find Bosnia on a map. Well, it's going to be an assassination in this region of the world that is going to start World War one of the most deadly wars in history. And so, nationalism is a big part of that. It sets off an alliance system that will take what should have been a regional conflict and spread it essentially around the world. So there's a lot of history in this of the Balkan region changing hands from Ottomans to essentially the Slavic different Slavic nations with their own independence, like Serbia and Bosnia, and then Austria-Hungary annexing Bosnia, essentially taking over Bosnia. So the area is changing hands a lot. And what you see is a conflict between the Slavic people and the Germanic people about who's going to control this area. So, like I said, heavily Slavic. It's where World War One will begin, which, like I said, should have been essentially just a regional conflict that is going to spread based on an ethnic-based alliance system that will, just spread the war across all the major powers of the world. So it's important because of national identity and because of the outlets to the sea. Russia just absolutely feels the need to keep that area friendly to them because they don't have really any warm water ports. They do have ports, access to the ocean for trade, but a lot of them freeze over in the winter. And so, they need access there. And so it makes it not side with the Serbians because of ethnic identity, but also because of economic reasons and the need for warm water ports. So the Ottoman Empire, like I said, is crumbling, and it creates a power vacuum when the Ottomans pull out. Austria-Hungary feels like it's losing authority. It's kind of also an empire in decline. It will annex Bosnia because it feels like they can annex Bosnia without much trouble. So they do that. That will upset Serbia, who kind of sees themselves as the leader of that area, and the Balkan Peninsula as being kind of their sphere of influence. Serbia can't challenge Austria-Hungary on their own, so they turn to Russia for help. They have these ethnic links; both are Slavic. And so Bosnia, which is also Slavic. And so the idea for Serbia is to create this pan-Slavic union or this sphere of influence that they're kind of in charge of. When Russia sides with Serbia, Austria-Hungary can't fight Russia on their own, so they turn to Germany to counterbalance the Serbia-Russian alliance. And so Germany is going to step in on the side of Austria-Hungary. Austria-Hungary can't act without German permission because they know they can't stand up to Russia. And then, interestingly enough, now that Germany's involved, there's another country out there that doesn't have Slavic ties to side with Serbia or Russia, but they do have historic reasons for hating Germany. Which country might that be? I'll give you a second to think about it. If you said France, you'd be right. It's absolutely France because they had just lost Alsace and Lorraine. They hate Germany. And so if there is a situation where France can get their revenge on Germany, they're going to take it. And the fact that, Germany's located here, Russia's here, and France is here. So, an alliance between Russia and between Russia and France can crush Germany, who's in the center. So, they see this as a really great opportunity. And so all of a sudden now you start to see the alliance system forming that will ultimately be in place. All right, so uh, there you have it. This is pretty much reason number one for World War One, which is nationalism. Nationalism is fueling all of this conflict in the Balkan Peninsula and in Alsace and Lorraine. The next major reason, and the last reason that we're going to talk about in causes of World War One Part One is imperialism. Imperialism is just the reemergence of colonial interests. And so, to be an imperialist power, you're essentially taking colonies. And so, imperialism is when stronger nations dominate weaker nations politically, economically, and militarily. And they do that for resources. So, Europe at this time is the imperialist force in the world, right? There are other countries taking colonies. We've talked kind of about Americans' version of imperialism too. We do it. We don't do it nearly the way that Europe does it, and we don't do it as brutally as Europe does it. But the idea is these industrializing nations, they're building more stuff than they have resources for, and they're building more stuff than they can sell to their own people. So this becomes a problem. You want your economy to grow, right? But to grow your economy, you have to build stuff and sell stuff. So, England, who's an island, they have very few resources there, and very few people actually. And so, if they want to continue to grow their dominant economy, and their economy is the strongest in the world at this point, they have to essentially go in, conquer other weaker nations, take their resources, right, like timber or iron, take it back to Europe, take it back to England, take that raw material, turn it into a finished product. So they'll turn that lumber into a boat, then they'll take that boat and they'll sell it back to the country they dominated and stole the resources from in the first place. They'll take iron from another colony, essentially forcefully taking that iron. They'll pay for it, but they'll have trade deals that they're paying for it for peanuts. Sometimes they'll outright steal it, and then they'll take it back to England, right, where workers there will make good money turning that iron into steel, and then they'll take that steel and they'll sell it back to the colony where they essentially stole the iron from. And so that's what's keeping their economy afloat, and they're making a ton of money doing it. Well, all these other industrialized countries want to do the same thing, and so France is doing it. England is doing. Nobody's doing it like England. England controls about 25% of the world. They have so many colonies strung out all the way around the globe that the phrase is "the sun never sets on the British Empire." So they control mass amount of territory, and the feeling is they haven't left anything else for emerging powers, and so the newer countries that haven't been colonizing are looking around and they think that Great Britain and France have all the good land and are taking all the good resources. Well, what are those two new countries? Well, or the new countries that are industrializing very quickly. Well, we've already talked about two of them, Germany and Italy, right? They're looking around and they're saying there's nothing left for me. And if I want to get more territory so I can grow my economy, I'm going to have to take it from the people who already have those colonies, which are Great Britain and France, which gives us an economic reason for the alliance system that we have. So it's not just an ethnic reason or a nationalist reason for creating an alliance system. There's also an economic reason because it's a competition to be able to take colonies from the countries that already have all the best colonies around the world. Never mind what that's doing to the colonies that they're stealing all this stuff from in Asia and Africa primarily. The European powers, America, because we're a superpower today in 2020, we get a lot of flack for kind of the way the world is. But in reality, the European powers just decimated, the Asian people and the African people that they had these colonies in. And so, I mean, it's just there's economic consequences that are still being felt today because of European imperialism. So, to be able to be an imperialist power, you have to have a strong military. You just do. I mean, think about it. What are they doing? They're going into another country, to either stealing their resources or forcing those resources to be sold incredibly cheaply. They're then taking those resources back to the home country, turning it into a finished product, and then selling it back to the people that they stole it from or bought it for them for next to nothing. Those countries aren't going to let you do that willingly, right? The only way that's going to happen is if you show up with a bigger, badder military and essentially at the point of a gun force them into that terrible trade deal. So for imperialism to happen, you have to have a big, strong military, which militarism is another reason for the cause of World War One. So hopefully you're seeing that all of these reasons are connected, right? You have to build this big, strong military. Well, what happens historically when militaries get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger? Well, they become more and more influential, right? That's the case, and that's not always a bad thing, right? America has found a decent balance. Dwight Eisenhower will later warn about the growth of the military-industrial complex, and sometimes our military does exert over the over influence amount of influence in American politics. I don't know if I said that right, but I think you get the idea. I mean, it happens in America too, but we've found a decent balance there with a civilian head of our military. But in Europe at the time, these militaries grow so powerful that a lot of times the military generals are more powerful than the political leadership, which will make war more likely, not less likely. And so, as the desire for imperialism grows, the competition for colonies increases, and the growth in the size of militaries also increase. The major colonial powers would be England, France, Germany, Spain, Italy, Portugal, and we really need to include the U.S. We are trying to expand in China, but we're not expanding in Africa. It's to a much less degree, and not to the point that it's putting us necessarily in conflict with the European power. So, and like I said before, imperialism is also required to fuel industrialization, but that's the thought process at the time. We know today it's not required for that. Free trade agreements can take care of that, and so you can trade and on a consensual basis with these nations, and that can fuel industrialism. Plus, although free trade does have its drawbacks, one thing is sure, that free trade, beats imperialism, because free trade essentially ends wars. The more two countries trade together, the less likely they are to go to war with each other. And so, it's imperialism is not necessary to fuel industrialism, but at the time it was believed that imperialism was necessary to fuel industrialism, and what we know is what people believe can be very, very potent. So you can take a look here. Here is a map of the world and the colonial powers. If you take a look at that, one color should really jump out to you, and that should be the light green color. You can see light green, that's Great Britain, or the British Empire, which is controlled by England. And you've got Canada there. You've got the areas in the most valuable areas in Africa, which is kind of the Egyptian area, the Sudan, which is a large area if it's not a ton of resources there. But then, the like South African area, Nigeria. Then you look to the crown jewel of the British Empire, which is going to be the India-Pakistan area. The British control that. There's all kinds of valuable spices and diamonds and jewels and stuff in that area. The Burma region, all the way down into the Indies, and then clearly Australia. That is the British Empire. It is about 25% of the Earth's surface, and being controlled by a tiny little island in Europe, which goes to show you that technology and can just really dominating technology will allow you to dominate the world. And so they control about 25% of the Earth's surface, and the area that they control is some of the most valuable resource rich areas in the world. And so you look at Germany, the brown area, they're very desirous of expanding. They've got some territory, and be careful there. There's two types of brown. There's dark brown and light brown. So the light brown is Spain, the dark brown is Germany. They've started to expand, but they really feel like they don't have enough to fuel their industry, and it's going to set them at odds with Great Britain in particular, but also that purple area there, which is France, which also controls significant portions of the world. So you start to see propaganda like this pop up all over Germany. And you can see here, even if you don't read German, what you can see clearly is a map of the world that is black, and then you see this red figure on top of it. And so, the red figure is clearly an octopus. Octopuses are known for octopi, octopus, I don't know. To have tentacles with suction cups, so they're known for grabbing and holding on to and not letting go of things, having a strong grip. And so the tentacles are reaching out and gripping different parts of the world and holding on and in their clutches. And so the octopus is located, the head of the octopus with the Union Jack flag on it, which comes to represent the British Empire, is located right on top of where England would be. And so even without reading German, we can see what the message is in this German propaganda. It's the British Empire is essentially grasping up and taking control of and not letting go of all these different areas of the world. And clearly that's being shown in a negative light, that it's the greedy British that are taking all of the resources and hoarding them for themselves, grabbing them and not letting them go. So that is where we're going to leave off for our lecture today for causes of World War I, Part 1. We will finish the causes of World War I tomorrow with Part 2. Thank you very much for your time. I will see you again shortly.